What is up, guys, man? Devin here back with another classic live stream. I want to also give a huge shout out to my new subscribers for joining the movement, where we help men experience life, travel, and finances. As a community, we help men level up and become high value in the world today. Do make sure to hit that like and subscribe button so you don't miss out. So, without further ado, let's get in the live stream. We have a special guest here, and he's here to talk about Jamaican women and dating them. But before that, can you please introduce yourself to the panel, Bijan?
Sure. My name's
No.
Bijan Dane. I live on the East Coast. I was raised on the East Coast, and I do some writing and some brand management consultation.
Man, that's definitely a unique thing to do, man. um, so, what made you come to Jamaica?
I met someone in the States who lives in the U.S. seasonally, but also lived in Jamaica seasonally when the industry that she worked in was busy in Jamaica. She worked there, and then when it was hot in Jamaica, because she had a mom in the U.S., she stayed in the States. So met her here in the United States, and then when the season wound down in the U.S., she went back there. So I started visiting her, and then sometimes she would come to the States again, either when the hotels in Jamaica were either laying off again or just to visit her mom, or a combination of both. And just the first couple times were on my own, although I did manage to see her. And then a couple of the trips were specifically to see her. And then later on, some were a combination of business, but managed to see her during the trips.
Oh, wow. So, how are actually the hotels in Jamaica? Is it on average? Are they really like up to date, or
It
how
just
is that?
depends. I mean, there's everything from the Holiday Inns to the Ryu brand to Moon Palace, which is in the Palace Resorts brand. It just depends. I mean, there's everything from um, all inclusive, family oriented with, one big buffet, and then maybe an Italian restaurant, a Mexican restaurant, a Caribbean restaurant, an Asian restaurant, to smaller, to family owned. Um, and they're all in different parts of the island. Some are in Montego Bay, some are in Ocho Rios. I've never been to Kingston really. Some are more west, like in the Grill. Just depends on, I guess, the price point, and whether you want to stay in one that's a little bit more quiet, or whether you want to stay in one that's a little bit like someplace in Cancun or Tulum, in the sense that it has the big buffet and you walk around with a wristband that gives you access to everything. But there's a range, just like there are in the States.
Oh, wow.
There's smaller ones that are, less modernized. I wouldn't say less modernized, but don't have as many amenities.
Wow. So, for all my viewers out there, what would be the best location in Jamaica for them to actually travel to?
Again, it depends. I mean, Montego Bay is more touristy, and has, like I said, some chain hotels and larger hotels. And it's where one of the airports is. So it's closer to the airport. Kingston is more developed. It'd be more like going to Manhattan, not as touristy. The Grill is on the west, tends to be more rural, more people with farms and animals, and, a little bit more rustic, although it has a ton of hotels. Some of them are from the 70s and 80s. It used to be kind of a counterculture, a hippie getaway. It isn't now. And then Ocho Rios doesn't have as many. Ocho Rios is more almost all locals, although there are some hotels there. Some chains have a hotel in Ocho Rios and a hotel in what they call Montego Bay or Mo Bay. So it just depends on the person's taste and preference. There's no part that's better or worse. It kind of depends on the individual, what they're going there to do. You can swim in all three. You can sit by the pool in all three. Ocho Rios, Montego Bay, and the Grill. The Grill is further from the airport, so you're going to have to, there's going to be a long ride when you land and a long ride when you go back. and even to do some things in other parts of the island, it's going to require a van or transportation or hotel transportation or your own car, especially if you have to consider that the traffic is on a different side of the road than it is in the U.S. It's on the British side of the road. But there's no better or worse. It kind of depends on what you're going there to do and whether you're going to be leaving the property a lot, like, to go, I don't know, snorkeling or ATV riding or go to a different beach than the beach that's near you, or whether you're going to be on the property the entire time. If you're going to be on the property the entire time, I mean, there's, like I said, there's all-inclusives. There's even an all-inclusive in the West, on the West side. I mean, the Royalton brand, for instance, has a pretty upscale hotel in the grill. But in those all-inclusives, like the 4 restaurants or 5 restaurants that are not the buffet one, are pretty upscale, and you have to reserve them because they can be busy when they're crowded. So you can't just walk in the Italian restaurant or the Asian restaurant or the Caribbean restaurant one night without telling the front desk you want to go there. Sometimes you have to ask like 2 or 3 nights in advance if you're only going to be there a week, because those tend to be crowded because they're not as big as the buffet.
Oh, okay.
So there's no. It's like saying what's the best part of the U.S. to visit. Just depends on what you want to do.
Oh wow, man! This is actually
basically there's 3 major cities that have tourism: the Grill, which is not really a city; it's sort of the west and the rural part. Montego Bay, and then Ocho Rios. But Montego Bay is where a lot of, I would say, Brits and Germans and Canadians and US go. It would be more like the Cancun of it. That's not a good analogy, but it probably has more hotels. Ocho Rios, fewer, and the Grill has a lot, but they're kind of spread out along a long highway. They're not bunched up together. They're not on a strip, because the Grill is more country looking. So it looks more like Belize or something like that. It's not as urban.
Wow.
Which some people prefer when they go down there. They'd actually rather be in the Grill because there's no city-ish town center kind of feel. Although it has businesses like a city, they have chains and things like that. But again, they're all kind of on the side of the highway as you go down. They're not like in one central place like the other like in Montego Bay and in Ocho Rios, where the KFC and the Scotiabank and the this and the that are all kind of in town. You see people milling about in town, all at the same time doing those things or shopping or waiting for the bus. The Grill is like long stretch. I think they call it the 7 Mile or something like that. And the businesses tend to be on the side of the highway as you go further and further and further west, as far as you can go west on the island. And the hotels the same way. They're not central.
So the main question of today's video, man, how are the women in Jamaica?
Well, they differ. I mean, all the towns have their own culture, so they're different. People in Montego Bay tend to work at hotels or in the hospitality industry, so they have more contact with, like I said, Canadians and Germans and Brits than people in the other cities. So sometimes they're doing a little better. Although, like I said, they tend to be seasonal, and they do lay off when it's warm. People in Ocho Rios don't have as much of that contact, although some people move to Montego Bay to take those jobs or to apply for those jobs. So they've lived in both. Kingston, again, is more like, city or working for city or working for local establishments or the government or something like that. So they tend to be a little different in some ways. Montego Bay has a lot of rougher sections and a little more hilly. Ocho Rios, sort of flat, as flat as you can be in a country that's kind of mountainous. Just the fact that it's a Caribbean island, it's mountainous by nature, but it's not as mountainous as Haiti by any means. And then in the West, a lot of people like from Negril and parts of the West, like Westmoreland, they consider themselves more country. smaller, sort of grew up almost on the land, walking to school, farm animals, chickens and things like that. So those women are a little different in that sense. They're not as urban, at least in their upbringing. They might have moved when they were, after high school. So it would be like comparing people from a small U.S. town or what we call the country to somebody from the city to somebody from a tourist zone like Miami or Orlando or Vegas. So they're all different. They have a lot in common. It's probably like 80% in common, and there's probably like 20% difference depending on how they were raised. And then you have to factor in that a lot of them have been to the States because they have family in the States. So they've lived elsewhere and they have things to compare it to because they've been to Miami or New York or Boston or Montreal or Toronto because there's so many people from the Caribbean diaspora in those cities. So they've had a little bit of both, especially if they tired of working in hospitality and wanted to kind of diversify because hospitality is sort of the only industry there. So there's no one way that they all are. It just kind of depends on how much exposure they've had to the U.S. in one way, like, their mom or brothers might have lived there, or they might have been back and forth there. And it also depends on whether they grew up in a little town on the island or whether they grew up in one of the bigger cities.
Wow, this is some good intel, man.
I would say the generalities are they're, very West Indian, proud of their island. They know they have the best, musicians, and when they go around the world, or when people have gone around the world and told them that they go in bars and nightclubs and hotel lobbies around the world, they hear reggae, even though it's from their island. So they know everybody uses reggae, even in commercials and even in department store music. So they're very proud of that. They're very proud of what they've done in track and field. They think they're the best at everything, not in a bad way, but just because of their sense of pride, because they're sort of the United States of the Caribbean. So a lot of the famous calypso artists, a lot of the famous dance hall performers come from there. A lot of the fighters, a lot of the actors, a lot of the influencers, a lot of tourists come there as opposed to the other islands. So they're kind of like the U.S., whereas Trinidad and the Bahamas and Barbados and St. Kitts and Nevis are like the other countries. And so since people are more familiar with their country, whether it's through Rastafarian culture or whether it's through music or whether it's through actors and actresses that have become famous worldwide, or whether it's through sports, they see themselves, they're like the U.S. or they would be like the Texas of the U.S. So they're very proud, generally relatively diligent and hardworking, although that can be like a double-edged sword since there's only one industry. So some people don't look outside that industry for work because there isn't much work outside that industry, unless you're in Kingston. Some of the other generalities in the 80%, I would say pretty fun-loving in the sense that, they like music and like to go out. Not everybody. Some people are more homebody and more quiet and more pensive. But I would say for a Caribbean culture, they tend to be kind of outgoing. I wouldn't say they're as studious or quiet as, say, maybe people from Barbados or Bajans or most Trinidadians, or even the Bahamas is a good analogy. They're a little bit more animated. Fashion sense is pretty domestic and Jamaican because it's warm all year round. Not everybody dresses the same, but it's kind of similar. Probably more similar with the men than it is the women, because women have more options in fashion and more sense of style. But you do see a lot of similarities. You don't see a ton of Western brands or name brands, unless it's in like a bag, a purse or something like that, or a bag, like a handbag. Education levels kind of vary, but most people that you're going to meet probably just high school for the most part. You don't meet a ton of people that have some college because they tend to either move or they're in Kingston. Some other commonalities where they don't differ from town to town. Pretty close to their moms. Of course, not everybody grew up with their dad, but in instances where they did, close to their dad as well. I wouldn't say they're super focused on marriage, maybe compared to an American the same age. It's there, and there's some peer pressure because their girlfriends and friends they went to high school with are starting to get married and starting families.
Yeah,
It's tricky when you only have one industry to make that move, and it's also tricky because a lot of the men are not making a lot, so it's not. It's not an obsession. I would say it might have been a long time ago. It's hard for me to say. The only way you can judge is by some things that their mothers and their aunts' generations say, and whether they're married or not or divorced. Not I would say generationally, like 35 and under, not super domestic or into like maybe cooking, cleaning, and it might just be because so many of them work in hospitality. By the time they get home, which is usually 10 or 11, because a lot of hotel shifts end around 10, they're just tired, or they're kind of they're kind of in a service industry all day, and it's problematic for them to do that at night. I'm not saying they don't do it. I'm not saying they never learned how to do it, but it's not a biggie. And in terms of just attitudes around male-female relationships and dating, I'd say they spend a lot of time on social media. They spend a lot of time talking to friends on social media. Everybody's on WhatsApp, which is sort of a phone / texting / video calling app that a lot of people around the world have that live outside the U.S. Not so much China. They have WeChat, but pretty much anywhere else you go in the world, like Europe, Latin America, probably the Middle East, people have something called WhatsApp. So they're on there a lot. A lot of them have social media profiles, not in a monetizing way, but more to socialize and to stay in touch with family and friends. So it would have been Facebook until recently. Now it's probably more IG, although a lot of people are still on Facebook because it's kind of the culture where you wouldn't be on IG a lot unless there was a reason for you unless you could make money off IG. But people are on IG too. Yeah, but just a lot of time on the phone, a lot of time chatting with girlfriends. Some shopping. Again, a lot of people don't have a ton of money to really shop a lot because the hotels lay off seasonally. And a lot of people end up going to the States after, I say May, when it starts to get hot there, and people don't go there as much, like from England and Germany and Canada, because they don't like it there when it's super hot. So then a lot of people go to like Cape Cod, some parts of Florida, other northern cities, and they work in tourism there, or they'll work on a cruise and then come back when it's right before it gets hot, right before it gets cold again in Europe and the US. They'll work on a cruise ship for a few months and then go back to Jamaica when it's cold in the colder countries, because the hotels are busier then, and the room rates go up and the occupancies are higher. So you meet a lot of women who've worked in that industry or only work in that industry, so they don't have that much experience outside that industry. And a lot of people settle down, but a lot of people just date and just haven't settled down and found anybody because, again, the men are in the same financial bind they are, in that there's only one industry. So to settle down is kind of a serious call, because if you're finding, if you're looking for a guy that is an earner or provides security and safety and makes more than you, it's going to be tricky when a lot of guys are like waiters, hotel staff, drivers, hotel housekeeping, cab drivers, and things like that.
Yeah. So, are Jamaican women feminine or are they more masculine? Speak on that.
I wouldn't say they're masculine. They're a little outspoken, kind of feisty. It's just a feisty West Indian culture in terms of. It's hard to explain, but there's just something in the Caribbean around knowing something and studying something, researching it, and knowing a little bit about it and being opinionated, not argumentative necessarily.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't say they're feminine in the way that most guys in the dating sphere define feminism. But I would say in terms of clothing, socializing, dating, liking men, admiring men, talking about men a lot, following men on social, getting dolled up to go out. In that sense, yes. Probably a good analogy would be in some countries like a Latina. I don't mean a U.S. Latina. I mean, in the actual Caribbean and Central America and South America. So feminine in that way, go out, get dressed, hang out with the girls, hang out, go out without the girls, that kind of thing. But in terms of the way guys use that term, like submissive, never talks back, quiet, cook, clean, soft-spoken, Filipina tone of voice. No, I wouldn't say in that way.
So, do Jamaican women speak English as their second language, or
No, it's their first. They might use patois among themselves, but they speak English. It's a national language. They were colonized by the British.
Oh wow. So how would you say is it dating multiple women at once experience there?
It's common. See, you guys are looking at it as Westerners looking in or Brits looking in, because Brits are Jamaican if they're black, but Jamaican or Trinidadian or Bajan if they're black, or Bahamian. But you guys are looking at it as Westerners looking in. So you're asking the question from a point of if you went there. But it's common for them to deal with because their men do it and they know their men do it, even some of the married men. So it's very common that they know that guys are seeing someone on the side. Probably not as common as the women doing it, although they probably do just to get back at the guys. But in terms of you doing it, it would be a little trickier because you don't live there. You're not going to drive a car because you're driving on a different side of the road and the steering wheel's on another side. In some of the towns, you're going to see the same people when you go in town and make your daily rounds or go to run errands. If you're out with somebody, that girl's girlfriends or somebody she knows, or aunt or cousin is going to see you. You don't know how to get around without a driver or a guide. People go to the same clubs or bars. It's not that you couldn't possibly do it, but there's not, Montego Bay is not. You could probably do it in Montego Bay in some sense, just the way the town is built. There's some sections where you could hang out and not hang out in another section. There's more like way, way up in the elevated part. If you just had an Airbnb there and never came down into the more sea level part of part of the city and you guys didn't hang out and go do stuff in public, you could probably do it. Ocho Rios probably not as much because you'd have to go into town center to do almost everything, like, you know, grocery shops, supermarket, cleaners, bank, and everything like that. It'd be tricky. Negril, yeah, because Negril's kind of rural. Again, if you guys were just at the crib, yeah. But again, if you went shopping and she wanted to tag along and she was like, "Can I go with?" The other girl's gonna see you more than likely, even though Negril is kind of on this long 7-mile highway. The way Negril is laid out, it would be tricky because a lot of them know each other from school, from like the elementary schools or the high schools, and a lot of people post on social. So like if she posted during a date or took a pic at the restaurant, took a selfie of you both, yeah, her people that grew up with her would see it. If somebody changed their dating status online, people would see it. Still millions of people, but it would be tricky. It wouldn't be like Puerto Rico where, you know, there's San Juan is this big teeming city and like that. So yeah, it's something their men can get away with because they know the man's doing it. So it's not like he's doing it to not get caught. If you did it, you not living there, it'd be tricky because you're not. It's not a place where you can easily move around and about with your own car because you're driving on the opposite side of the road and the steering wheel's on the other side. You're not just going to be running around picking up people.
Wow. So
there's no like real Uber. There's like taxi drivers.
Oh, wow.
So people kind of would know, like if they wanted to FaceTime you and you like weren't available, people would kind of be able to tell because you're not from there and they can tell by your accent. They would know, you know, and as soon as you open your mouth, they know by your accent you're not from there. So you'd be like, oh yeah, the American guy that you so and so, I saw him with, you know.
Oh, wow. So,
or you know, or like I said, Canadian guy or British guy. As soon as you open your mouth, you know, as soon as you go in the store, people know that you're not Jamaican because you're not speaking patois.
That's hilarious, man.
So it's almost like not being able to speak. Like if you went to Poland or if you went to Italy and you couldn't speak Italian, because if you can't speak patois, that's what locals use when they're only around one another. So if you said, "Oh, I'm just going to blend in because my skin is brown and I have tightly curled hair and I have African features and I'm wearing pretty much what the guys here are wearing," no. As soon as you go buy something or as soon as you get in a taxi and you say, "How much is it to the airport?" instead of "How much at airport," they're gonna know you. They're gonna know you're not Jamaican or West Indian because they speak patois. So women, you know, there's things you could do, but not dating her out and about in public. You would almost go there if you kind of wanted to date one person, like you met her in the States, like I did. Like guys used to first go to Brazil. Well, they didn't go to Brazil because they had met somebody up here, but they would go back and forth and to fly and see that person after they had met her. They met her in Brazil, but after they met her, because they lived in the States, it was a long distance relationship. So they would take January off and stuff like that and go, you know, spend time with that girl. So it's kind of like that. If you went there to see multiple people, I wouldn't say it's impossible, but in the age of social media, it's trickier. Because people post when they're out. That's the whole point of going out is boom, and we're eating such and such, and then they take a picture of the food and picture of you, and or even when they're dancing. It's not like 1989. Somebody go out and like, oh yeah, this guy's tipping, or this guy's cheating, or this guy's creeping on his old lady, and there's no social, and there's no smartphone with the ability to take a picture in it. The whole point of going out now is to take a picture while you're doing something for the woman.
Yeah, because that attention is really important.
Well, especially in a place like that, because somebody taking you out is a big deal because you've been working in this hotel serving other people all day and being grinning and being nice to them and pretending you like them. So when somebody takes you to wine and dine you, not that you have to take Jamaican women out to have a relationship with them, but when somebody does do that, it's a big deal because some of them are waitresses or massage therapists or front desk people or hotel staffers or housekeeping or work in another department of the hotel. So they're in the service industry all day and they don't get to chill and go out and have somebody bring them food.
Oh, wow. So have you had any experience with rich women in Jamaica or any like rich areas?
Well, they're mostly in Kingston, so not personally. Anecdotally, I've heard secondhand some things, but there's not a ton. Like I said, people that are highly educated, sometimes either the generation before them or the generation even before that is relocated to like Toronto, Boston, Brooklyn, or Miami just for better opportunities, like two or three generations back. So there are some, like I say, in banking and in media and in journalism and in the hospitals and things like that. But because I met this girl in a seasonal job in the States and I met her family and her sisters and her mom and her aunt, I haven't been around a ton of wealthy Jamaicans. And the ones that I've been around, I didn't date.
Mm.
The Jamaicans I probably met that have the most money are in the diaspora, like the U.S. and Canada, because they've had a few generations to adjust, and they're in a country where you can do more than one thing for a living, and there's an industry outside of hospitality, and a lot of them are guys.
Mm. So for the viewers out there who want to know, what is your opinion on the woman's body count in Jamaica?
It's pretty high, I would say, in most instances, unless they were really from a tiny rural place where they just didn't want to be stigmatized because of it. Because young people go out, there's a dance hall culture, and it's about dancing and partying and whining and meeting new people. Drinking is pretty prevalent, even among women. It's not like with guys, but they do have rum or rum and coke, or they have a Red Stripe and they drink beer. So drinking is pretty prevalent. Hanging out at night is pretty relaxing because of the stress of the type of jobs that they do and the lack of transportation and the fact that they have to take taxis to get to work and such, or walk to work, or hitchhike from work. So they really like to, have a nice time on weekends. So they're meeting a lot of people. The odd Jamaican girl that works especially in the hospitality industry, has had relationships with people from what they call from foreign. Not a ton of them have, but some have had relationships with people from foreign, or those tend to be longer term, especially if the guy can get away and visit them relatively regularly. So I wouldn't say it's low because it's a partying culture and there isn't that much to do when you're off other than that. Now the ones that date have managed to date since their early 20s pretty monogamously, probably don't have as high or settled down and had kids earlier. And some of them might not be married to that person anymore. But it depends on when they got married in the first place, how high it was even before they settled down with that person. Were they 21 or were they 27? And it also depends on what their lifestyle was like before they met him. So I wouldn't say it's a place where it's low, because you're not wearing heavy clothes any time of the year, so everybody can see how you're built. You're not staying in the house, even if you're hanging out with with quote unquote your girls. or dating a guy and he's taking you out. If you break up with that guy, you're going to be seeing somebody else. And if you're working in the hotels, I would imagine a lot of those people end up dating each other because that's the only people they're really around. So I can't imagine that it would be low. It might not be as high as some places, a similar woman of the same age in the States, just because a lot of the women, until they're really established in their profession, probably don't have their own cars. So it's the guy has to come get them. But it's still moderately high. I wouldn't say high like people are promiscuous. It's just cultural. It's just people break up. People see one guy break up, argue, break up, have a kid by a guy, break up, divorce, what have you. It's not a place like it where it's almost impossible to get a divorce like the Philippines, which is super Catholic. And an annulment costs a ton. So there's serial dating, probably very similar to the U.S. without the financial advantages of the U.S.
Yeah.
And guys cheat, so people sort of they factor that into how they're going to date because guys cheat.
Because I know in the U.S. it's more of like a business for marriage.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of people nowadays are kind of just walking away because you're pretty much at a disadvantage as a man.
Yeah, well, they have that. That's because of the custody laws and the alimony laws. I think down there it's just finding somebody that's super dependable. At least if he cheats, it's not in your face, or he's kind of outgrown the cheating, and he's still a good dad. And it's not to knock the men. There just isn't that much work outside of the hotel trade. So there's a lot of depression and there's a lot of alcoholism and a lot of there's some domestic violence. There's some negative stuff that goes on with underage girls. But that's any poor country. So it's not as the abject poverty isn't as widespread, say, as a Haiti, because Haiti doesn't have much tourism. But it has a lot in common with Haiti, just in terms of cultural, the lay of the land, the mountainous nature of it, the fact that it's almost 100% black. Although Haiti does have more Creoles and more people that are not 100% black than Jamaica. So the Bahamas is a closer analog, much smaller. But it's a going out and doing stuff Friday night and Saturday night culture. That's where all that music came from, and dance hall and reggae and calypso is literally about making music and going out and celebrating and dancing and hanging out. You know, all that talk about like whining and all that stuff comes from Jamaica. So even in the diaspora, people are like that. That's why they have big Caribbean. That's why you have Carabana in Toronto and Reggae Sunsplash and Crop Over and all these big festivals in the Caribbean, because people love to go out and they love music and they love to dance and they love to meet new people. So it's not like promiscuous. It's just what else is there to do? They're not going to participate in a lot of tourism because a lot of people never leave the island. They don't have the means to leave the island. They're not going to go to a major sports event, although they might watch some football, what they call football, and some cricket, although cricket is more of a guy's thing. And not going to sit around and watch TV all day, and it's hot out. So, you know, going out and having a drink, having a smoke, being with your boys or being with your girls is just what people do, at least until they get married.
Now I'm sure I'm sure everybody want to know this, but do Jamaican women change to Western customs when bringing them to the United States?
No, they already know about it because they got cousins up here. They got moms up here. They got uncles. Some of them have literally been here. It's all over the TV. They speak English, so they already know about it. And some of the artists that they look up to are Caribbean, like Cardi's Trinidadian and Dominican. Rihanna's from Barbados. Nicki is from Barbados. So they know about everything. And plus, because their music has been adopted worldwide, they kind of are global in a certain way, because they know that Marley and Dennis Grant and Patra and Shabba Ranks and all these people are known around the world, not just in their own countries. So because of that, the world comes to them. So they're always around Germans, they're always around Canadians, they're always around Brits, they're always around Yanks. So they see what they wear, they see what they drink, they see what they eat. They cook their food to those people's tastes. They're dependent on their tips. So even though they have their own TV shows and their own music and their own churches and their own schools and their own, track and field stars and actors and musicians and preachers and teachers, they're very, very aware of what's going on in foreign, because foreign is always biting their culture. Walking around talking about man and yaman and Irie and all that. So people are always sort of appropriating their culture. So because of that, they know about everybody.
Oh, wow. So how is the religion there?
It's not super religious. There are some Pentecostal or more religious people. It's not super common. I wouldn't say it's as common as, say, Pentecostal faith in Puerto Rico, where you see these churches that are, they don't have any walls because it's so warm there. And you would think that, maybe judging by Puerto Ricans that you see like in the Bronx and Brooklyn and stuff, that there's going to be like a ton of Catholics, because in New York City and in the boroughs, they go to a lot of Catholic schools. But then when you get to the actual Puerto Rico, there's a lot of Pentecostal churches. Everywhere you drive is like Iglesia Pentecostal, 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 even on the TV on Sundays. So Jamaica isn't quite like that. And also because there's some, even though the people that aren't Rastafarian know about Rastafarianism, there's some spiritualism that isn't traditionally westernized. So although a lot of people, their grandmother's generation went to church, their mother's generation, not so much, their generation, not so much or not at all, there's some spiritualism around just a more Africanized version of being spiritual. And some of that is Rastafarian and some of it isn't. But it's more like in the British Caribbean, it's more around the way that they've adapted religion to their African ancestry, as opposed to actually going to a church on Sunday. And some of that is sort of offshoot isn't really the word I'm looking for, but some of that sort of spreads out, or is osmosis, because there's so much Rastafarianism. So people that aren't Rastas have adopted some aspects of Rastafarian culture. And so they're not necessarily religious in a British way, even though they were colonized by the British. So it doesn't come up that much.
Mm. So
you're almost as likely to hear somebody say Jah as you are to hear them say God. It's not like stereotype like in the movies, like Jah, Yaman, Irie. It's not like that. That's kind of silly and over. It's like an exaggeration. But because they've been around guys and women who embrace that, it does seep into the mainstream somewhat, and it's in their music, so they know about it. And it's less likely that they're just going to be like super, super, super mainstream church. But it does exist. You just don't hear it around women under 40. Now, sometimes when they get a little older, that changes. When they have families and they want to be more settled and conservative, and they want their kids to have certain values, sometimes that changes with age. But not in every case, because it's a party destination. And it's not a party destination just because of the tourists. It's in their own culture to hang out and have fun. And hanging out and have fun and being this ultra religious person would seem hypocritical. Because everybody would be like, I just saw you Saturday night. Now you're in here and you're sanctimonious or you're holy or you're, how are you the same person? It's not this, of course, people do that in the States too. But in Jamaica, it would be a little trickier because when people go out, they really, nobody's sitting in their chair.
Mm. So, how's the online dating in Jamaica?
Internally, among people that aren't there visiting as foreigners, I didn't notice it a ton because everybody kind of again, knows everybody from school or never left their town unless they left their town to work in Mobe because there's more tourism there or more hotels there. So I don't think they use the apps for that as much as they would up here. I think a tourist might use it up there and turn it on when they got there. But internally, I don't think they use it because they just date who they meet in the streets and in the markets and in the places where they work.
Mm.
And then just, people they meet through friends and word of mouth. Because if you're not leaving the island, you're just dating islanders. And you're not going to post a real upscale profile if you don't have a lot of money on a dating app. You're not going to say, I'm pushing this car and I live here and this is the crib and this is me in Cancun and this is me in the south of France and this is me because you're just not rolling like that. So I never heard instances of people being on there much. People are mostly on social there to just instant direct message their friends and post pics.
So, have you ever do you know any traits negative for the woman in Jamaica?
Depends on what you like. There might be traits that might be negative to a guy that's looking for somebody that never talks. But I wouldn't say negative if you're a realist. Just kind of depends on what you like, because all the women there are not one way.
Yeah.
You just have to. It would be like being here. You just have to date until you meet somebody that's a good fit for you. There's no one homogeneous or monolithic way all the women are. Like there's this one type of Jamaican woman. Some Jamaican women have lived in Canada. Some Jamaican women have only worked around tourism, so they look at people in a sort of a cynical light because they see the negative aspects of, how people leave their rooms, how people tip or don't tip, how people look down on people that work in service industries, how people are only there a week. So they're a little jaded in that sense, or realist. Some Jamaican women, maybe on the western side of the island, like Negril, don't work in that industry. They're more rural. So I wouldn't say there's any one negative that's a universal negative. I would say it's more case by case, woman per woman, one-on-one. Some things that guys might consider negative, and they might say, I don't date Jamaicans, period. Even if the man is Jamaican. But those would be cultural things. They wouldn't be things that are necessarily only prevalent in a relationship. Like some guys might say, oh, I'd rather date somebody from a certain country because they just by the patriarchal nature of the country, the women are, I'll just use a term guys use a lot, submissive. Some guys might even go as far as to say quiet. You wouldn't necessarily go there to meet that kind of person. It's not to say that they don't exist there. It's very case by case. Some people are studious and quiet. They just happen to be Jamaican. Just like some people are studious and quiet and they happen to be born in, Philly. But I wouldn't say there's like oh, wow, stay away from this one trait. Now, if it were a lady asking me that about guys, there are some things. But not a guy asking me about ladies.
So, are there any dangers to be aware of when in Jamaica?
Yeah, just the fact that people can tell you're a tourist because of your accent. So there's going to be a sense that you have uh, more paper than they do. So you have to be careful, especially, like I said, certain parts of Montego Bay that aren't as in the commercially or retail zones. Although, Montego Bay, all the retail is not in one spot like it is in Ocho Rios. But if you're, out and about from your hotel and it's late, like I said, not that you're going to be in a car by yourself. You're probably going to be with a driver. But if you're walking, um, there's some crime. Not all of it is anti-tourist crime, but a lot of it is not Jamaican on Jamaican because they don't think a Jamaican's going to have a lot of paper. Some of it is like on an Airbnb because they notice you going in and out for 4 or 5 days. Some of it is violent. Some of it is not violent. Sometimes they have, especially in Montego Bay, I haven't noticed it as much in other cities, but they'll have, what do they call them? Not civil arrest, not lockdowns, not curfews. State of emergency. And they'll name certain parts of Montego Bay for people to stay away from because there have been a lot of robberies. Or there's either been a lot of robberies or a lot of robberies with shootings or just a lot of shootings. Now, some of the shootings might be beef and they might be Jamaican on Jamaican and not necessarily for financial reasons, like stick-ups. But some are. So when I used to go there a lot in 2018 and 2019, there would be these advisories. And you could read them online or you'd hear them by word of mouth from people that live there, or you could read them online before you got there and say this section, this section, this section, this section, Rose Hill, blah, 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 blah. This section is on is under state of emergency, which meant you had to be mindful going out and about. And a little more so if you're a tourist because you have an accent and people are going, oh, that person's got money. They don't speak patois. So yeah, there's some things to be mindful of. It's probably not as prevalent in Ocho Rios and certainly not as prevalent in Negril, even though Negril is even poorer. It's just kind of country and there's no place for anybody to like really corner you and do anything to you because it's all kind of spread out along this long 7-mile stretch. It's not like you're, when you're in your hotel, you're just sort of there. You're not going to go off and do a whole bunch in the grill because it doesn't have built up town center like that.
Yeah.
But I would say in Montego Bay, definitely some, just because of the poverty.
Mm. So, what kind of jobs do women usually have in Jamaica? I'm curious.
Nursing, sales, hotel front desk, massage therapist, spa employee, restaurant employee, housekeeping. Some drivers, although you don't see as many women in the taxis as men, but there are some. Transportation front desk staff at the hotels, airport, other things in the hospital other than nurses. Those are the primary ones.
Mm.
But mostly tourism and hospitality trade. In Kingston is going to be a little bit more diverse because there's going to be more banking, education, media, large companies, and not just tourism and hospitality. So there's going to be more college women and college educated women and more white collar and office working women in Kingston. Not as many in the other cities. People in other cities, they want to work in Sandals, they want to work in Hilton, they want to work in the Marriott brand, they want to work in the Ryu chain, things like that. So that there's like a steady check and you also have tips.
Mm. That's some good info.
And then there's probably some stay at home too, although I don't think a lot of people can afford to stay at home.
Mm. So not many people over there, it seems that they don't really stay indoors. They're mostly outgoing.
Until they have children, yeah, mostly because it's a fun-loving, warm outside culture. There's never months where you have to stay inside because of the cold. The temperature dips a little bit in the fall, but not like in New York City or not like in Toronto. So people are just out because it's nice, and locals go to the beach just like tourists do. They probably don't go as often because it's right there. Take it for granted. It's there. It's not going anywhere anytime soon. But they do go just to take a dip and just to be, just because it's refreshing. And they shop. People shop a lot because you just have to, go on their daily rounds and their weekly errands. But because there's so much dancehall music and so many artists, not the nationally and internationally known ones, but just in the local establishments. And because the week is just so stressful, a work week, because you're waiting hand and foot on other people for a living, people like to relax and have a good time, have a little spliff and a little Red Stripe or a little rum or a little rum and coke, and talk to their friends about something other than work. Although they do end up talking about work a lot because they're all in the same field. So it's like being around police officers or teachers, but they just like to not be around tourists for a second because they know they got to go back the next day or 2 days after that. And again, that's the same reason some of them like to travel and get a break and go see their family members in Canada, or their family members on the East Coast of the US, or their family members in Miami, just to get away from, the bed sheets and the buffets and the front desk and the waiters and the driving people around the hotel property and a golf court and picking up after other people's clothes in rooms and things like that.
Mm.
And if they, best case scenario, some of them, if they met somebody abroad and they weren't looking down on West Indian culture or their blackness, if the person, was a person of means, they wouldn't necessarily marry them and leave, because Jamaicans think they're better than anybody else, and they don't like the U.S. They look at it as Babylon, and because it's in their music, and they look at it as settling for living in foreign because you couldn't make it there. But if the guy stayed there, they would like it if he had a bag. But a lot of them don't like to leave Jamaica because they like Jamaican food, culture, music, weather, climate, their friends, the fact that it never gets cold, the fact that their older relatives are there, the fact that they can use patois. And it's not that they are totally closed off to moving north, but they also know people in the north that are struggling. So because all their relatives in the north are not really living super, super large just because they moved, they kind of look askance sometimes at people who made that move and are just living like moderately in Brooklyn or moderately in the Bronx, because they're like, why go way up there if you're not going to be, it's still relatively more money than the person is making in Jamaica, but to the point of the person that's living in Jamaica that's like, let's say 21 to 38, they're like, yeah, I have relatives that live in foreign, but they're not doing that much better than me. So they're saying, for you to be in a much wealthier country, you're not doing that much better than me. So it's not like a Thai woman or a some Filipino woman or some Colombian woman or some Dominican woman like, oh yeah, or Brazilian 10 or 15 years ago. Oh, I met this guy and now he's going to take me to, a richer country. They're not really on that because they think they have the best music and the best track and field athletes and the best looking people and the best weather and the best everything of anybody in the world.
Mm.
So they're not on, oh yeah, let me go dig and find a Yank. It happens, but they really, really, really love Jamaica.
Man. So how are those Jamaican restaurants, man? Because I used to love those Jamaican beef patties, spicy ones. I still love it till this day, man.
Yeah, if you like curry goat, if you like oxtail, curry goat tastes a little bit like lamb for those that haven't had it. If you like fish and rice or peas and rice, if you like, to your point, beef patty, there's a food they call festival, which is sort of a desserty food. People eat a lot of There's a few staples I haven't named. But yeah, it's very tasty. It's seasoned for Brits and Germans and Canadians in the restaurants, but in the local smaller places in the towns, it's made like someone would make it in their house. I would say it's very good, very filling, very hearty, super healthy because mango and plantain and all the fruit grow there, so the fruit's native. It's not shipped and it's not old. The pineapple and the coconut are not shipped, so they're not old, so they're not tasteless. So it's very good food. You just have to watch it because it's starch based and rice based.
Yeah.
So you have to watch it if you're there for a long time. Like if you were to get a house for a month, like an Airbnb, you have to watch it. Just because you don't eat it all year round, you'd have to kind of watch it. But very good, very tasty. A lot of plantain in the morning.
Man. But yeah, man, this is great info for the live stream, man.
It would be very similar to some people, I guess, there's things that they eat that Puerto Ricans don't eat, but in terms of the plantain, the pineapple, the coconut, the rice, if you've been to hotels, if you have family members, or you've been to a lot of places in the five boroughs that serve Puerto Rican food, be somewhat similar to that. The only difference is there's a lot of oxtail and curry goat, which is different than in Puerto Rico. It was more beef, fish, chicken. Jamaicans do eat a lot of chicken. They eat sort of like a stewed chicken, like a brown stewed chicken, brown stewed fish in kind of a thin gravy, chicken and rice. So they do eat a lot of chicken as well. The desserts in the hotels tend to be sort of catered toward non-Jamaicans. So when you go in the hotels, they have like watery tasting cantaloupe, watery tasting honeydew melon, even the pineapple. I mean, the pineapple should be good. But one complaint I've heard there is that for an island that has a lot of its own fruit that grows native, they don't serve a lot of that fruit when you go to the all-inclusive. They serve fruit that you could get in a hotel anywhere in the world, like honeydew and cantaloupe. So it's old and it's been shipped, so it tastes like water. They even have watermelon cut up in some of the fruit cups and fruit cocktails and fruit dishes in some of the hotels, which is a little pointless. But the food's very, very good, very, very hearty, very, very filling. And you could be very fit there. Unfortunately, a lot of people aren't fit because they let themselves go in their 30s and 40s, even some of the women. Even though they have to walk a lot of places, and even though you see a lot of people on bikes, the men tend to be in better shape into their 40s and middle age than the women. The women tend to put on more weight than the guys do. And it may just be the nature of what the men end up doing for a living compared to what the women end up doing for a living. And then some of it might be just the biking.
Yeah. Well, all right, man. This stream has definitely been great, man. Bijan, I'd like to thank your info again, man. So, Bijan, is there any last words for the viewers?
So I think the viewers, for the most part, would enjoy the relaxing sort of mindset of Jamaica, not to stereotype it any different than any other British Caribbean island. The climate, the people, going to these places where you, like I said, you can swim, you can visit waterfalls, you can rent ATVs, you can do horseback riding on the beach. You can watch some sports, but there's sort of like a community level sports like cricket and football, soccer, not big time sports. There's no big time like pro basketball league or anything like there is in Puerto Rico. There's not professional baseball like there is in the Dominican because they don't play baseball for the most part. They play cricket. There's not in arena boxing, although there's probably some small boxing. But all the hotels have entertainment. All the hotels have nightlife. They have bands. They'll have a different type of music every night, or sometimes the same theme music. They have interactive things like trivia contests, dancing, giveaways, prizes, happy hours. You can meet local women. You can meet them in the hotels. If they're in the hotels and they're staying there, they're probably with a guy or with their family, but they are on staff. You don't see a lot of single women going to the all-inclusives because they just probably don't want to be in a hotel when they work in one. Although they could go because they would go at a discounted rate. Sometimes they just save their money and they go to the States, or they go to Miami, or they go to visit family in New York or Boston or someplace like that instead of hanging out in Jamaica. But everybody's very engaging and friendly. People are happy to show you, how to get somewhere, give you directions. Very fond of sharing their culture. Very fond of turning you on to like artists, Rastafarian culture, Rastafarian food ways of preparing food, historical figures, like Garvey and people like that. Really, really proud and love to talk about that. So it's a fun place to be. There's a lot of poverty. You'll see people walking back and forth to school on the side of the highway. You'll see people walking back to work, like in hotel uniforms on the side of the highway. A lot of people without cars, but I wouldn't worry about that too much. It's a nice place to be. It's not quite as developed, I'd say, maybe as a Puerto Rico. Not quite as many people that have been to the States as a Puerto Rico. It's a little more rural looking than that, although there's some parts of Puerto Rico that look like that, but they don't tend to be the cities near San Juan. It would be a little bit like if Cuba had a ton of hotels, maybe like the Cuba of the late 50s when it did have that. And I just think you're gonna have a nice time. If you know a lot about the culture, you follow the music, you're gonna see some things and say, "Oh, that's why that person is always talking about that in their records," or "That's why this dancehall artist talks about that." And if you hear a lot of patois, you're gonna start to understand dancehall music better because you're gonna be able to hear a lot of the words more clearly because you're hearing people use them in everyday speech. You say, "Oh, that's what that person's saying on that record." So it's a lot of fun, but it's not a paradise because you're around a lot of negative things. There is some violence, not necessarily anti-tourist violence or on tourist violence, but there's a lot of poverty, and you'll hear about some things because they'll just be word of mouth or in the news while you're there. And I would say if you're dating somebody that was raised there, it can be a lot of fun just because they're just prideful. They're not super immersed in American stuff because they got their own stuff, and family oriented, good time, romantic, affectionate, like to please a man, and but very realistic and very worldly because they've been around people from all over the world because people around from all over the world come to them.
And there you have it, guys. Make sure you look after yourselves from around the world. And I'll see you guys on the next live stream. Have a good one.
Thanks for having me on again.
You as well, man. It's great to have you back.
Be easy, D. Talk to you soon.